Breaking tonight, it is starting to look like the American public has been misled again as new Obamacare numbers and headlines paint a fuzzy, if not false, picture of what's really going on with the president's signature legislative achievement and a law that affects millions upon millions of Americans. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Earlier today, the Obama administration claiming nearly 3.3 million people have enrolled in health care plans through the 1st of February. But when pressed on the data, the administration refused to say how many of these so-called enrollees have actually enrolled. In other words, have actually paid for their plans, as opposed to just having something in the shopping cart. The administration refused to say how many of them even have coverage tonight, or how many of these folks were the very same people who had coverage before, but just got kicked off of their pre-existing plans thanks to the Obamacare law last fall. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell reacted by reminding people what the Congressional Budget Office told us just last week.
And for all the disruption and pain, it's a law that will still leave 31 million Americans uninsured at the end of the day. That's why it's not surprising when we hear that nearly 90%, 9 out of 10, of the new enrollees in Obamacare exchange plans are actually folks who are already insured.
But while Mr. McConnell and a couple of fact-checkers were quick to point out the problems, many media outlets went right to the White House spin on the story. From the Washington Post, Obamacare beats a January enrollment projection. And The Hill, enrollment in Obamacare hits 3.3 million. Really? And from McClatchy, healthcare enrollment rises. More young adults sign up. Well, more than what? They're way below what they wanted. We've got Ed Henry on the announcement, columnist Ron Fournier of the National Journal on his afternoon inside the White House, and Joe Trippi on how the Democrats are handling it all. But we begin with Ed Henry, our chief White House correspondent. Ed?
Megan, the bottom line is the big picture is pretty bad for the president because the original projection of 7 million people enrolling, even under the best case scenario they're talking about tonight, 3.3 million people enrolling as of now. They have until the end of March to get to 7 million. They're obviously not going to get there. They believe that's because the website set them back so badly at the beginning of all of this. But the bottom line is, even as they pick up more enrollees, they're falling far short of what they projected. Now, there is good news here that we have to point out. You mentioned some of the numbers of the people who are enrolling, and we should point out specifically, they note that in January there was a 65% increase from December in terms of the percentage of young adults who are signing up. Those young healthy people are obviously very important to the math here, but there's a lot of details they're leaving out. For example, how many people, as you noted, are actually paying in. I asked Jay Carney that today. He said that's up to the insurance companies to give that information because individual patients are giving their checks to the insurance companies. So we'll press the insurance companies for that information. There's also been a McKinsey & Company study that said that only 11% of the people who have now enrolled are actually people who didn't have insurance before. So that's another question. Bottom line is there are now, when you add all of this up, 25% of the people roughly are young adults when they projected they needed 40% to pay for all of this. So they're still short. They've made progress, but a long way to go.
And now they claim that they never really meant that 40% number. That was all nonsense. Ed, thank you. My next guest spent the afternoon at the White House along with a number of people, speaking with many folks familiar with this situation. He believes the real issue here is not enrollment, it is credibility. Ron Fournier is the senior political columnist for National Journal. Ron, good to see you. And so you're somebody who has been defending the concept of this law and health insurance for, purportedly it was going to be for 30 million Americans. Now we're told we're going to have 31 million Americans without insurance, despite the law. In any event, you're talking about how now it's just come down to credibility. How? What do you mean?
Yeah, well, I know inside the White House what they're really worried about right now is they know they really messed up early on, and they're having a hard time with these numbers, as Ed talked about. We can get that in more detail if you want. What they realize they have a big credibility problem, that this is a branding issue. This is like trying to sell Pepsi or Coke, and if you're not selling a product that people believe in, and if they don't believe in the people who are selling it, you've got a problem. And even inside the White House, they know they've got a reputational problem that's setting them back at least 6 months, maybe even further. And
so let me ask you, so is the solution to mislead more? Because, we saw the president in his O'Reilly interview talk about that nonsense, Medicaid number. He's making up numbers, saying, taking credit, giving the law credit for getting all these people on Medicaid. Query whether that credit is deserved. But in any event, those numbers have been discredited by fact checkers, across the country. They continue to say them. They say 3.3 million Americans have enrolled now on the state exchange and the federal exchange. That's not true. We don't know how many have enrolled.
It's my biggest problem with this White House and with politics in Washington in general is they assume people are dumb and that they're not going to get beyond the spin and find out what's really happening. The fact of the matter is they said they needed to get to 7 million. Now they're saying, no, we weren't talking about 7 million. They were. The fact of the matter is they said
it's on tape. Wait, just hold that thought.
That's what I'm saying.
It's on tape. Let's just, for the folks at home, just in case they thought we weren't going to play this, we are. Watch.
Good for you.
Well, I think success looks like at least 7 million people having signed up by the end of March 2014.
Go ahead, Ron.
Right. You can't undo the truth. They said they had to have about 48% of the people who signed up had to be young invincibles, people who are primarily healthy to help make the math work. They're around 25% now. I'm sorry, they said they need to get 38. They're at 25% now. They're not where they need to be. That is just a fact. You can't undo that. They're telling us they got 3.3 million. Well, as you heard earlier, that number is basically made up because we don't know how many people have actually paid the insurance. So in other words, today I could have signed up 7 times, and I would have been counted 7 times into that 3.3 million when I haven't put a dime down on insurance yet. They're not being honest about that. And lastly, I know the talking point now is that 90% of the folks who have signed up, quote unquote, actually had insurance before and lost it. That number, I wouldn't believe that number. That is really not plausible. The real number, even if you ask inside the White House, is closer to 30%. Even the White House is acknowledging that at least 30% of the people who have, quote unquote, enrolled had insurance before all this happened. And if you do the math, 30% is too high for this to work.
Wow.
So, this may end up, and again, I want people who need insurance to get it, but this may end up working well, but if it keeps on heading the way it is now, the numbers just aren't going to add up.
Yeah.
And the amounts will be honest about it.
And I want the viewers to know, just on Ed Henry, he was talking about how the numbers went up in January versus earlier. But if you compare month to month, December and January, enrollment's gone down. December's total enrollment was 1.8 million, and today's report indicates that 1.1 million people signed up in January. That's a drop of 640,000 plus enrollees month to month, despite how they are spinning it. Ron, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.